Hello, in this video, I'm going to demonstrate the use of two-dimensional arrays. However, there is no limit to the number of dimensions here. So let's create a program to understand what is two-dimensional arrays. So I create a class program02. So in order to create an array of multi-dimension or two-dimension in this example, you have to use the number of brackets as many dimension as you want. For example, I can say int and the two square brackets or two pairs of square bracket to say that this is a two-dimensional array. For example, I can say nums is equals to, and then I can initialize this with new int, and then I can say I want a two-dimension containing 3 rows and 4 columns. Now, the notation is nothing to do with rows and columns as such, but we generally say it is 3 rows and 4 columns. Now, in the memory, it is not a matrix as such. So, you can also initialize this in a different ways. But however, let's just print it first and see what exactly the values are. So, I'm going to go use arrays.toString of this nums, and when we execute this, you will see that there is a 3 array objects inside that. So basically you can see for each of the row there is an array object itself. So I will have to loop through and print each one of them. So to do that, I may have to first check what is the total number of rows I have. So let's just check here. So by typing nums.length, and you can see nums.length will give me 3, and that's because now this is the length of the array. So in other words, you can say this array is an array of arrays. So now that we figured out that there are 3 arrays are there, I can use a loop to iterate over nums and then check one single array is basically arrays dot toString, and then I'll print this nums of I. So nums of I will pick up nums of 0 for the first time, then nums of 1, then nums of 2, and then it's going to come out of the loop. So if I execute this now, you should see that I got an array of 4 elements, another array of 4 elements, another array of 4 elements. Now, this way of declaration is, while it is simple and easy to use, but sometimes you might want to initialize an array later. So this is how you can do. You can say nums equals to new int of 3 and then not specifying what is the number of columns in each one of them. Now, this is perfectly all right at this point in time. However, for each of these 3 references, we don't have anything that is initialized. They remain null. So if I execute this now, you can see I got null, null, and null. And that's because I have not mentioned what is the first element array, what is the second element array, what is the third element array. We can explicitly initialize that by saying nums of 0 equals to, now you may remember that we can initialize like this, provided we use another keyword called new. So of course, I'll have to say here that it is a new int array. So it is a one-dimensional array, and that one-dimensional array has been initialized to nums of 0. Similarly, I can say nums of 2 or nums of 1 is equals to and some values. Like for example, I can say a new int of 5 or 6, and then I can say nums of 2 is equals to now probably new int and containing some value like 100 and 200. All right. So when you execute now, you can see we have each of these elements in this, we have initialized to different numbers. So when I execute this, you can see the first array is what we have initialized, the 4 of them. The second array is an initialized to zeros, that is 6 zeros. And then the third array is initialized to 2 numbers. Now, one other thing that you can observe here is that each array element in the main array nums is a varying length array. So this is why in some languages like C#, they call this as a jagged array. Now this is in C language and C++, this is also popularly known as a pointer to a pointer. Now in the memory, these are not continuously occupied. While the first elements, they are continuously occupied, the second element is not continuously occupied. I mean the first and the second themselves are not continuously located. Now if you want to access them in a separate loop, You can also use this something like this. You can use a for loop over nums, and then you can take up that individual element, something like you can say int temp of as an array, int array temp equals to nums of I, and then you can loop through that. So you can say for temp of I or temp of j, let's print this j. So the j value basically is the TMP of j. That's the value that we want to print. Of course, it's going to print using a new line. Now, I probably would like to use a bracket here, something like a square bracket without println, and then I use a print, and then I use a probably a space or a comma to indicate that there is no more elements, and then of course a closing bracket. So this would closely print something like this when I execute, right? So as you can see that we have ensured that we are navigating with individual elements and printing each one of them. Of course, if you did not want to print the last comma here, so then you will have to loop through one less than this length and then print that number at the end. So you'll have to say system.out.println TMP of not j, but you'll have to say TMP dot length -1. So print the last element manually. And this time we are avoiding printing of the last comma like you see here. So we get more control on the loop elements when we navigate by ourselves. Now you can also initialize nums in another way. You can initialize this with a single initializer. Now this is to say that nums is an array, but of course we didn't mention any elements at all. So since this itself is an array, the first element is one array, the second element is another array, the third element is another array, and so on. But this kind of initialization using curly bracket is only possible while declaring. So I'll have to do this something like this. So we have to initialize this when declaration is going on. So I can supply some numbers like for example 100, 200, 300, and this could be some random numbers and random length too. And so there you go. So we have an array being initialized, and now I can print the same. So when I execute this, you can see that our values have been initialized successfully. Now this kind of notation can be used with anything. If I want an array of strings or array of numbers, even for array of objects. Okay, so this is how you would be able to use a two-dimensional array, and using loops you can print them too.